So why do we pay property taxes? The foundation of property taxes are found in the state's constitution. Article 12 of the Ohio Constitution authorizes 10 unvoted mills for every county. We're going to learn what a mill is shortly, so don't worry. But it authorizes a minimum tax rate that everybody can pay, and that number, that millage, is divided among the school district, the political subdivision, that would either be a city, a township, or a village, and your county government. Anything beyond these 10 mills has to be voted on. So everybody in this room certainly has voted on a property tax levy at some point in their life. So the state constitution essentially says we have property taxation in the state of Ohio. There is an amount of taxes that we can all be taxed that does not require a vote of the people. That has to go to one of three entities: a school district where you live, the city, village, or township where you live, and the county in which you live. Anything beyond that has to be voted on. There are many types of entities that can seek tax levy dollars at the ballot. And so, of course, we mentioned schools, city, township, villages, senior services, developmental disabilities, mental health and recovery, children's services, libraries. Some counties fund community colleges. There are a wide variety of entities across the state, yes, that could be funded with a property tax levy. There are many taxing jurisdictions, not all of which, by the way, are public governmental entities. You could have nonprofits and others potentially seek that. So it's a very wide swath of individuals that can seek
Can
that.
I just ask you, okay, since we can have property taxes on the property owners, why are the other things allowed to be voted by non-property owners? Doesn't make sense then.
Well, that is, take that up with the framers of our state's constitution.
Does it say they can?
Yes, yes, that people
Just
have the right to
affects
vote on it,
property owners.
yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, you go back to our country's founding, right, when our country was founded, only property owners could vote in any election.
Yeah.
That was the rule at that time. The property tax rate that one pays depends upon their residence in the county. There are many taxing jurisdictions within a county, and each district has a different rate depending on the levies voted on in that particular jurisdiction. And so the way to think about it is, if I live in the same school district as you, the same city as you, the same everything else, you and I would be in the same taxing jurisdiction. Meaning, so me and my neighbor are gonna pay an identical tax rate. Now, the value of our homes might be different, and that will mean we pay a different amount. But the rate we're charged is the same in that jurisdiction. Now, I can tell you in my county, and again, my county is about 20% of the size of Lucas County. We have 57 different taxing jurisdictions. And so, you get into Lucas County, you have many, many different types of taxing jurisdictions depending on what city you live in, township you live in, school district you live in, et cetera, et cetera. But within that jurisdiction, everybody pays the same rate, and that's really important, because one of the things you learn in property taxes is it doesn't just matter what happens to the value of my property that determines how much I pay. What happens to my neighbor's property matters just as much. And I know that gets confusing, and we're going to talk a little more about why that is. Any questions before I move on this? Yes?
Our mailing address is Toledo. Our school district is Springfield Township.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our school taxes all go to Springfield, but then we still get taxed in Toledo for schools.
So you live in Springfield Township,
Mm-hmm.
you live in the city of Toledo,
Uh-huh.
but you live in the Springfield School District.
Mm-hmm.
And your taxes go to the city of Toledo, but and they also go to Springfield schools. Yeah, and that makes it, now, you're not paying multiple school districts, right? You're picking one or the other.
That's two different districts. But, well, no, what you're saying is she's paying Toledo tax, but not on the school.
Yeah, you're paying the city of Toledo, right? And the city is responsible for zoning and fire and police. And then you have the Springfield School District.
Right.
So one entity is providing education, one entity is providing police, fire, EMS, zoning, planning, all that stuff. And so you're not paying Toledo schools and Springfield schools. you're paying City of Toledo and Springfield School District.
But we still pay taxes on like the fire department, Springfield Fire Department, and,
No, not what it said.
are you sure?
I'll check it tonight. maybe.
Yeah, so you have those three basic entities, right? You have a school, you have the subdivision, and you have the county. We would all agree you're paying Lucas County, you're in Lucas County. But you pay one school and one subdivision. You shouldn't be paying multiple.
Shouldn't it be explained that they live in Springfield Township?
No,
But
we
they-
live in Toledo.
Well, if they're in the school district, you don't live, because county is one thing, city is another, and townships are another.
Well,
But-
That's what he
Springfield
said,
Schools, wait a second, Springfield Schools goes way over the, whatever, the expressway and takes in all those apartments and a lot of space.
Gotcha.
That is in Toledo.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
you
like-
would have a school district of one jurisdiction reach into another jurisdiction.
Okay.
But you shouldn't ever be paying multiple schools or multiple subdivisions at the same time.
Well, it's like where I live, I'm in Savannah Township, but the school that we pay our taxes to is Evergreen,
Mhm.
because we are the furthest east section of Evergreen.
Right.
But we're not Fulton County, and yet the majority of the school is in Fulton County.
Okay, everybody good to
Keep going.
advance? Okay. Entities involved in the process. So first and foremost, you have the Ohio General Assembly. The state's constitution creates very, very broad, overview of how the system runs, but all the rules and regulations that we abide by at the local level are created by the Ohio General Assembly. And so, as it's stated here, any structural changes have to be passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. As I mentioned, in the state budget process that just concluded at the end of June, there were a variety of structural changes to this, the property tax system that were vetoed by the governor. The Iowa Department of Taxation is a really important entity because it oversees each county in the administration of real estate taxation. And the goal here is to ensure equalization of property valuation. And so there was a concern many decades ago from the state that you might have a local county auditor that is purposefully depressing values. I think this is a story that's played out in Lucas County, arguably, where you have an auditor that purposefully depresses values, or maybe you have I think what happened is you had a former auditor that was depressing the values, and then you've had the new system where it skyrocketed all at once.
50%.
And so the goal of the Department of Taxation is to ensure equalization. So that if I buy a house in Toledo versus Cincinnati or Cleveland or Columbus, that my property is being evaluated more or less the same. Now, the Toledo real estate market is fundamentally different than Cincinnati, Columbus, or Cleveland, but that there's equal measuring stick to measure all of these. And that becomes important because, as the lady just mentioned here, you have Evergreen School District that spans in multiple counties. So if Fulton County's auditor is really harsh and says we're gonna raise everybody's values extreme, and then you have Lucas County that's depressing them, that school district's gonna unfairly get tilted towards Fulton County. So equalization here is really important. The downside to the role of the Department of Taxation is there are times where a local auditor is seeing something in their community that the state is not seeing. And there's a real tug and pull in a lot of more rural counties like my county, where we see it one way, they see it another, and ultimately, they're the ones that win out. I mean, the state gets its way more times than not when there's a dispute. We can't set a value of your property without the formula and everything getting approved by the state.
What is the formula?
Well, I'm not, so that's one of the pleasures I get of pleading that I'm not an auditor. I'm not an expert in the valuation of people's property. I'm the collector of it. But the simplest way I answer that question when people ask me is they're trying to get 90 to 95% of what your house would sell for if it were put on the market.
They found the highest price that was sold in the neighborhood, and then they taxed everybody from according to that, and that's what they did.
Yeah,
And
it's-
each house is unique.
Comparable sales definitely play a large part. There's no question about that. I sit on the board of revision. The gentleman back here just said he went to the board of revision and had his value lowered. And so when I hear those cases, I am trying to guess, when you come in, if we have your house valued at $250,000, could you get $250,000 if you put this house on the market and sold it? And when you come in and explain it to us, right, there are all kinds of things that we learn, right? We're not going into your house, we don't know the status of your plumbing and your roof and your this and your
They
that.
didn't look.
Well, they don't look.
They just, oh, this is cute, this is nice, your grass is mowed, okay, you're gonna raise it.
Yep, and that's the way that it happens across the state, Now, you can invite an appraiser into your home. Either you can pay an appraiser privately, or you can invite the county staff to come in if you want them to see certain things.
But it's not, of the appraisers that come out to do this, they're just little peons that are off the streets. They don't even know nothing about property, they just get hired in. And then they're supposed to just go drive by and take pictures and look.
Yeah, I don't know about Lucas County. In our county, we have a firm that we work with, that the auditor works with, that does this in a lot of counties. So, and I will tell you anecdotally in my county, and I don't know, Lucas County could be different, is we are not reaching the 90-95%. We are tending to undervalue people's property. I mean, and that's just universal rule. I think part of the challenge is that we've had that expectation that, hey, my house could probably sell for 200 and it's valued at 170 and everything's okay. And then other people have sold, and there's been such a quantity of sales after COVID that my house shot up to 230, and I'm like, whoa, just a couple of years ago I could have sold it for 200, now you got it way over. So COVID really played a role in causing weird things to happen in the real estate market, and then the appraisal process across the state responded to that.
Well, now it's dropping. There's the inflation going on.
Some of it is,
Now the
yeah.
properties are starting to drop. Now they got us up, and some of them are going down now. And so what are they gonna do? They want the high dollar, but now it's taking the dip.
It should go down, and we'll get into some of the mechanics of how some of that works. And when 2008 hit and we saw values really plummet, at that time in my county, we had a Democratic auditor, there was a lot of frustration, we'd gone through revaluation in 2010, and the values didn't go down, and we're like, what the heck, the whole market's collapsed, and nobody's value went down. And we ran a candidate for auditor, I was not involved at that time, but our auditor won by 7 votes, beat the incumbent, and his issue on that race was, I'm gonna lower values to reflect what's happened in the real estate market, and he did that, he followed through, and the auditor's still there today. But if you want them lowered when times are bad, you gotta expect them to go up when times are good. But the lesson I want people to take away, one of the big 2 or 3 things, and I'm gonna say time and again in this presentation, is just because the value of your property goes up, doesn't mean you should be paying more. And it sounds counterintuitive, but as the value of your property increases, it should not necessarily translate to a tax increase. And we're gonna learn why that is.
That's what they just did.
Well, it's not how the system should work. The system was designed to prevent inflationary increases in property taxes. And we're gonna learn about why that isn't happening. So, trust and be a little patient, and I promise you we'll get there. So the county auditor's role is to put value on property, as we've been discussing, and then at the end of the process, when I, as the treasurer, collected all the money, the auditor settles that money, distributes it to all the schools and all the different entities that have real estate taxes. And then I've talked a little bit about what the treasurer's role is. From the moment that we know what you're gonna owe, we calculate it, we collect it all, we manage, our property tax programs, and then ultimately I have the responsibility of foreclosing on homes when people don't pay. And that's the hardest part. And that's the hardest part of it. And the thing to understand is that the auditor and the treasurer are administrating this process on behalf of the state. This is a process that starts at the Ohio Constitution level, that is prescribed by the General Assembly, and we are independently elected officials except for our role in the real estate process. We have responsibilities to follow directives of the Ohio Department of Taxation, and our responsibility is to collect this. And so, in my county, I've worked really, really hard to help people who are struggling. We file foreclosures, we have very, very few that go through because of the programs and things that we're able to offer. And I have a small staff, but we're able to work really hard and really keep that to a minimum. But we have a responsibility to collect. It's the hardest part of this process is to see someone lose their home as a result of this. That's what the law prescribes. That's what the law describes. So with that, calculating your taxes, in the simplest of terms, the taxes owed is the value of your home times the tax rate that you're paying. And I'm sure everybody in this room, when they think about real estate taxes, thinks about value, right? We think about the auditor putting the value of the home, and does that match what I can get? And there are all those questions. I'm here to tell you that we spend 80% of the time thinking about value, and we should be spending 80% time thinking about the rate. The rate is the key. The rate is the key. And that'll be understood more as we go through this presentation. So let's define each of these terms. Of course, the value of your home is the appraised value that the auditor gives in accordance with the rules and regulations provided by the state. But you are not taxed at the appraised value of your home. If the auditor says, we think your home is worth $250,000, that is not the value you are taxed at. The Ohio legislature says you are taxed at 35% of your appraised value, which is called your assessed value. So I don't know how many folks in the room do that, but it's 35% of the appraised value. The tax rate comes in the form of mills. A mill is $1 of taxes owed for every $1,000 of assessed value. $1 owed for every $1,000 of assessed value. So we're gonna walk through in an equation what that looks like next. So your tax rate includes the 10 mills, up to 10 mills that are authorized in the Ohio Constitution, that the legislature sets as the minimum, and the number of mills that are voted on in your taxing district. So you have your base rate that you can expect to pay, and then you have everything else that your jurisdiction is voted for. Make sense?
Yes.
Alright, this is how you calculate a mill, or calculate these levies. So you have an assessed value times the tax rate in mills equals the taxes owed. So if we have a 5 mil levy on the ballot on a $100,000 appraised home, the appraised value of the home, you have to take 35% of that number to get an assessed value. That'd be $35,000. And then you would have a tax rate of $5 owed per $1,000 of assessed value, because it's a 5 mil levy, $5 per $1,000 of assessed value.
5 times 30%.
And that equation gives you $175 a year.
And that's just
One levy, right?
one levy, but we got all the
Right.
state levies, and that's.
Right. That makes sense?
Yes.
Pretty easy. So one of the challenges with this equation here is inflation, right? That a 1% increase in value in this equation would mean 1% increase in taxes owed, right? And my value goes up, my value doubles, I now owe $300 or $350, right? And that was the way our system operated in our state for a long time. And the General Assembly said this is not sustainable, because fundamentally, the value of my home doesn't track very evenly with inflation, right? You may have an inflation rate of 2%, and real estate prices might jump up 10% or 20%, they may go down 10% or 20%. The real estate market does not track perfectly with inflation, and it tends to spike, right? When we see the real estate market move, it moves one way or the other. And so the General Assembly said this doesn't work. And so they made the system more complicated. And that's gonna be one of the themes of today is at every turn of the changes in this system, we've made it more complicated and harder to understand. And that is one of the big challenges that we're in today, because we're to the point where nobody understands this, including the legislators, right? With term limits, right? These guys have a system that they create, and then 12 years later, you have a bunch of people who are in the legislature who don't understand it. And so this is what they did. They said, okay, we have these mills. Let's differentiate between inside mills and outside mills. They passed a bill called House Bill 920. Has anybody ever heard of that piece of legislation from 1976? It was a landmark piece of legislation. In my world, it's the ultimate piece of legislation that governs our system. And it radically changed how property taxes are calculated. The philosophy underpinning this legislation was as follows. Tax increases should be approved by voters. Entities receiving property taxes should not benefit or be penalized from large changes in the real estate market, right? So the goal here was to the greatest degree possible, unhook property taxes from inflation and changes in the real estate market. So to my point earlier, as the value of your home goes up, you should not be seeing spikes in property taxes. And I know there are people who are saying, Caleb, what you're saying is not right. My property taxes did spike. And we're gonna learn about why. So, House Bill 920 says there are two forms of mills. There's inside and outside. Inside millage is exactly what we learned on the previous slide. It's completely inflationary, meaning a 1% increase in value leads to a 1% increase in what you pay. The 10 mills that are authorized in the Constitution set by the legislature are effectively inside mills. That base tax rate that every Ohioan can expect to pay is inflationary. So as the value of your home goes up on these 10 mills, you will pay more. Now, we learned on the last slide that 5 mills on a $100,000 home is $175 a year. Meaning we have the 10 inside mills. So 10 mills on a $100,000 home, $350 a year. So if my home doubles to $200,000, now I owe $700 a year. I bet all of you in this room pay a lot more than $350 a year in property taxes, right? And so that's where these voted levies come into play. The vast majority of the taxes that everybody in this room pays are outside millage. And outside millage was created to be anti-inflationary. That as the value of your property increases, as the value goes up, the effective rate, the tax rate you're paying in the form of mills, goes down to keep the amount you pay on those levies the same. So as the value goes up, the tax rate reduces, and the amount of money that the entity collects, the school, the township, the city, the village, whatever, the amount stays the same based upon that effective rate reducing. So we're gonna see what that looks like. I know that's probably confusing.
That's why we just had a replacement.
We're gonna learn about replacements in just a moment, and that's exactly where we're headed. So
That's why they did it.
that's why they did it, yes ma'am. So if we go back to the example of the property, the $100,000 property and a 5 mil levy, we had calculated that $175 was owed on that property. Now let's say the auditor does a revaluation and finds that property is now worth $125,000. How much does that taxpayer owe? If we're talking about inside millage, if those 5 mills are inside mills, authorized initially in our state's constitution set by the legislature, you have an increased value of $43,750, which is 35% of $125,000. And then you have the 5 mills, now you owe $218.75, a 25% increase. So on inside mills, when the value goes up 25%, you pay 25% more. But for outside mills, or any mills that are voted on, any levy you've ever voted on, the amount that entity collects is frozen. Meaning that the assessed value has gone up, but the amount you're paying is frozen. And so the only way to do that mathematically is to reduce the millage rate. And therefore, the tax rate has to reduce. In this case, it goes down to 4 mills to keep the amount collected the same. So the legislature's saying that 5 mil levy is no longer a 5 mil levy. It passed as 5 mills. The auditor did a revaluation, and now that 5 mil levy is only a 4 mil levy because the value of homes went up 25%. Follow me? Did I lose any of you?
You know, I thought that it was, if you did your 100,000 at 35%, minus the 35, you pay the taxes on the 75,000. And you're doing it a little bit different. You're doing 125, and you're saying it's 35, you're only paying under 43.
Right.
I think it's 125 minus 43, and that's what you're paying the taxes on.
No.
Are you sure?
Let's put it this way. If you're,
Because I have never paid $175. Mine's always in the thousands.
well, here's the problem with what you're looking at, right? So where I live, and I guarantee you I pay less taxes than you because I live in a more public area. I pay on 40 mills. That's what I pay, 40 mills. Now, you all are probably paying 60 or 70 mills, right? I mean, that's the difference here. I'm showing you one levy, right? You have to consider, you're paying on dozens of levies. That's the difference. That's different.
Oh, yeah.
It tells you a lot of this, yes, it tells you a lot of this. It doesn't tell you everything, and we have a website that's really great about putting more detail. I think Lucas County Auditor does have a more detailed website. But the point in saying this is the legislature saying for all these voted on levies, if I have a fire department in Waterville and I put on a 5 mil levy, and that 5 mil levy generates $1 million, all I'm ever gonna get is $1 million, right? Whatever the value of the properties of Waterville are at that time, let's say 2025 when I put it on, times 5 mils, if that generates $1 million in 2025, that's all I ever get. 2026, 2027, 2028. We have levies in your county and in mine that go back to 1976 that at that time generated X dollars, and those levies generate the same amount of dollars, right? So you are not factoring in that you're paying more on these levies collectively as a community. That district has to go back to the ballot and ask for more money, right? That's the theory behind House Bill 920. If you're gonna pay more, it's gonna be because you voted for it. The exception to that is these first 10 bills. Again though, 80% of what we're paying is down here. The very small minority of what we're paying is up here. And so the entity does get a little bit of inflation on these levies, but on the vast majority of it, it's meant to be anti-inflationary. Meant to be. That makes sense? A little bit, maybe?
In other words, at the time that it's voted in, it's locked in to the property value at that time.
So, and I wanna note, this is important, that we are talking about as it relates to that taxing jurisdiction, not your individual property, right? So if I live in the city of Toledo, Toledo School District, everything Toledo, and you're my neighbor, and we have a community of people that are paying, and Toledo puts a levy on it, passes, it generates $2 million a year. Toledo's only gonna get $2 million a year. Now, if I put an expansion on my property and renovate it and make it great, you know, I'm gonna eat a bigger slice of the pie of that $2 million, right? But the pie doesn't grow. That's the key. When I pass a levy and I generate X dollars on year one, I'm stuck as a government entity getting that size of the pie. The pie isn't growing. Everybody's slice of the pie changes depending on what I do to my property versus what you do to your property. But the pie isn't growing. That's the purpose of House Bill 920. Following me more or less? I know we're getting into the weeds and it's only gonna get worse, I promise.
So if you put a new roof on, the property value goes up, or?
Well, and you gotta to some degree take that up with the county auditor, right? And so the number one thing they're gonna look at, to the lady's point here, is comparable sales. They're trying to first and foremost figure out what's happening in your neighborhood. Now they've got the drones that go by and they're gonna look at things. If I add on a shed, or if I, upgrade this, that, a roof replacement, they're probably not gonna detect, actually. Now, if I'm the gentleman in the back and I go plead my case before the Board of Revision and I say, wait a minute here, you got my property valued at $400,000 and I've got a leaky roof that's 32 years old, okay, that's gonna make us rethink this idea. We're gonna assume everybody's good, right? We're gonna assume everybody's good. And to some degree, you gotta explain to us, no, it's not good. I've got problems here. I've got this that needs repaired, this that needs repaired, and this that needs repaired. Then it's up to us, to the Board of Revision, the group of three. You have a county commissioner, the auditor, and the treasurer that have to make that determination.
And they're all corrupt in Lucas County.
Yes, they are.
I have a very, you guys know I'm actually saying this, I have a very good working relationship with your treasurer. Lindsay actually has been very bipartisan and helpful. As far as the association goes, I'm not commenting on anything within this. Within the context of our association, she's been very good to work with. Yes?
If they value your house and your house value goes up, say you have to take out a couple permits to do work, does that count against your valuation?
Permits to do work.
Well, like, water heater.
That's a great question. I don't believe my auditor, and I would plead that I don't know, but I don't believe my auditor would factor in something like that. Other counties may be looking at things differently.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move forward here, we're gonna talk about this outside millage reduction factor, right? And when I say reduction factor, I'm talking about that 5 mil levy is now a 4 mil levy. And that 1 mil difference is a reduction factor, and you do see that reduction factor on your bill. You do see it on your bill. And so, this is probably the most complicated slide in this whole thing. If you get this, you're gonna be fine. But the point in here is, and I've already emphasized it, is that when we're calculating this reduction factor, we're calculating it at a district level, right? And so if the value of homes in Toledo have gone up 25%, that means on all these voted on levies in Toledo, everybody gets a 25% reduction factor. So if the average value goes up 25%, everybody gets 25% reduction factor. Now you might say, Caleb, my property value went up 36%. What reduction factor do I get? You get a 25% reduction factor. Everybody in that jurisdiction gets the same reduction factor. And so I saw this play out in my county, and I guarantee you there are places in this county to happen where the value of your property went up less than the average of the jurisdiction. And when that happens, your property taxes actually go down. So if my value goes up 18% and the average of the communities went up 25%, I will pay less because I'm getting a 25% reduction factor on all these outside millage levies. And yeah, my property value only went up 18%. And that played out in my county, it plays out in a lot of counties. The problem is, what if my value went up 40 or 45 or 50? And Airbnb market is a very big issue in my county. I don't know to what extent Airbnbs are playing here, but you have stories in Sandusky, which is a little bit of an urban area, where you could sell property for $20,000 15 years ago that today are selling at $100,000 and they're getting renovated and flipped at $200,000, and then it's an Airbnb and people want to come stay on the lake. And you've got grandma who's lived there 50 years, whose value went from 70 to 180, and she's like, what the heck? So this plays games with people sometimes. And that's all I'm trying to exemplify with these next two slides. And so I think this slide explains a little easier. If I've got a $500,000 fire levy, and I increase the value of a community 10%, you're getting a 10% rate reduction. You're getting a 10% reduction factor. If I live in this jurisdiction, now the communities went up an average of 10%, Jane Doe's value went up 20, she's gonna pay more on this particular levy. Jimmy's value only went up 5%, he's gonna pay less. So his value went up, he's paying less. And then Kyle, whose value went up 10%, which is the same as the community, he's gonna pay the exact same. So all this is exemplifying is your neighbor's value matters just as much as your value does. So, quick note on tax credits. There are a few tax credits the legislature's created. One is owner occupancy, which serves as a 2.5% reduction on any property. If you live in the residence and you own the residence, you get a 2.5% reduction. However, Governor Kasich was very hot to trot to eliminate this credit after 2013. So for any levy that originally passed after 2013, you no longer get this credit. So if the levy started in, let's say, 2006 and has been renewed, you still get the owner occupancy credit, 2.5% reduction. If it passed after 2013, you do not get the reduction. The non-business credit, every property gets 10% reduction if it's residential or agricultural, but for levies passed before 2014, so same time period as the owner occupancy. And then I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with the homestead reduction is a credit available to those 65 and older, those with a permanent total disability, or those who have a surviving spouse of an individual killed in uniform, who have a household income at or below $38,600. It should be noted for these credits, who's paying the bill? The state of Ohio is. The state writes a check to reimburse the government entities. And that's one of the things that's been talked about is, could we offer tax relief and credits to people where we just don't reimburse it, where it's a true tax break, right? Because all we're doing here is robbing Peter to pay Paul. The state taxpayer that you're paying in income tax and sales tax is going over here and paying your property tax bill. And so this is not really tax relief, it's just passing from one to the other. Yes, ma'am.
On the homestead reduction, if you have a couple, one is 65 or older, the other one is younger.
Is the property deeded to the 165 or older, or are they other
It's in
deed?
both their names.
Call your auditor, but I think you should be good. I think you should be good.
Be able to get it.
I think so.
You should only be able to take one, wherever you're living in. Wherever
As
you're
long as your
living in.
income is that low.
Yeah, that's the key, is
That's-
the income, and that's included in social security and everything else, that's.
Oh, they go by income too?
Oh, yeah, and that's what makes it really difficult, that's what makes it really difficult. So,
Unless you're
yeah.
grandfathered in.
I talked to Rick about it,
Thomas,
yes, he's the one that put in, well, didn't pass the piggyback for the homestead, did you see that?
oh, yeah, the piggyback did pass,
It did?
yes. So what they did, one of these legislatures did, and the governor did not veto, was the ability that basically would double the homestead reduction if the county commissioners vote to approve.
They have to, yeah, they have to.
If the
adopt
county
it.
goes, and that would be a non-reimbursed credit, so you're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, that would be a situation where it is truly tax relief. Yes.
So we have to get it.
You gotta talk to your county
adopted here.
commissioners.
They say that, when I told them, they said, well, we don't know anything about it, and then I tell them to look it up, and then they see it, and they say, we still don't know anything about it, and they send it back to the auditor.
That'd be up to your county commissioners.
Okay, right.
A letter, the provision takes effect October first, my commissioners will get a letter September 30th asking them to pass it. So, evading the reduction factor. So, the good news here is, and I have Erie County, it should be Lucas County, but the good news is that House Bill 920 has had a revolutionary impact on property taxes. The people, you may not feel it, but I guarantee you, your tax bill would be at least double what it is without House Bill 920. Guarantee you. It has had a drastic impact in keeping inflation off of our backs in terms of property taxes. One of the most successful pieces of legislation, in my opinion, the state has ever passed. And it actually passed with the Democratic House, believe it or not. So, again, the vast majority of what we're paying on is this outside millage, these voted on levies. But there are exemptions in law that have been created over time, particularly for school districts, that are allowing entities, particularly schools, to evade the protections of House Bill 920 and put additional burdens on taxpayers. So we have this system that says we're gonna give you this reduction factor. You are not gonna pay inflation as the value of your property goes up, but you know, schools and others have very good lobbyists. They sneak little things into the bills. It happened in the 80s, it's happened since then. And what's happened is the protections that were given to us in 1976 have been eroded for the vast majority of the state. Not all of Lucas County, but for the vast majority of the state and for part of Lucas County. So, the lady mentioned earlier, replacement levies. So, replacement levies, if we go back to that 5 mil levy, way back, you know, we have the 5 mil levy that became a 4 mil levy. A replacement levy takes it back up to 5, right? So I have a higher value home and I have a reduced millage rate to keep the amount I'm paying the same. What a replacement does is it just takes the millage back up to 5, so now I have the worst of both worlds. I have an elevated value and I have an elevated rate, and now I have a tax increase. How many people though knew what a replacement levy was a tax increase? How many guys? A handful of you. But
And we say,
a lot of folks
think
don't.
that they're not
Yeah.
saying it.
A lot of folks don't know that, and so the legislature in the budget they voted to eliminate replacement levies. And that was the one provision that passed today, that was overridden, that was in the House. So assuming the Senate overrides, we will no longer have replacement levies. I was a huge advocate for that,
Yes.
because I think replacements are so deceptive to voters.
Yes.
They're so very deceptive.
Yes.
Now we get into the fun part, emergency substitution permanent improvement bond levies. Can all be used to evade House Bill 920. And there's this great hearse in our state called the 20 mil floor. How many of you are familiar with the 20 mil floor? A couple of you. What you used to call, Cindy, you called it a ceiling, I wish it was a ceiling, that's a floor. And so it leads to, and we're gonna learn how on the next slide, significant unvoted property tax increases. So you wanna get a picture of that?
No.
Okay, 20 mil floor. So, it is a provision of state law that guarantees that all public school districts in Ohio have an effective rate of at least 20 mils. There are, among the 611 school districts in the state, there are 10 or 15 that don't qualify for reasons we don't need to get into. In my county, I do need to get into it because Kelly's Island, which is part of my county, is one of those 10 or 15 districts. But this means that the anti-inflationary nature of outside millage ends once a school district reaches the 20 mil floor. From there on, all 20 mills act like inside millage, meaning that a 1% increase means a 1% increase in value means a 1% increase in taxes owed on those 20 mills. And furthermore, emergency substitution, bond, permanent improvement levies don't count towards the 20 mil floor. So let's take an example. In my school district, you have an appraised value of $150,000. My school district has an effective rate at 20 mils. The district also collects 7 mils of emergency bond permanent improvement. And so, if you take that $150,000 home times 35% times 27, you're gonna get about $1,400 in taxes. With the 2024 revaluation that my county went through, this property's going up to $200,000. Because of the floor, the taxpayer is now paying $1,960 in taxes. Without these exemptions, the taxpayer paid about $1,550. And so if we go back to this slide, you have to think about schools at most of the state at one time were, let's say 30 mils, right? You go through a revaluation cycle, the value goes up, and what happens with outside millage? When the value goes up, the rate goes down. So that 30 mils now is, let's say, 27 mils. And then you, 3 years later, go through another revaluation cycle. The auditor does a revaluation, and he finds that values have gone up another 10%. That 27 goes to 24, and 24 goes to 22, and 22 goes to 20. And then all of a sudden, once that effective rate goes down to 20, now you have a real elevated over, let's say 15 years, you have a really elevated value, but the effective rate is reduced to 20 to keep the amount the district collects the same. Well, once it hits 20, it doesn't go down anymore. You can't have 18 effective mills as a school district. You have to have 20. And so what has happened is, once you hit 20, when the value goes up 10%, the rate doesn't come down, you pay 10% more again. And so what's happened is, the schools are purposefully, a lot of them, getting to this 20 mil floor. How do you get to the 20 mil floor? Well, one way is not to pass levies, which you'd say, okay, that's fair, we're not paying more. But the other way is to pass these emergencies, substitutions, bonds, permanent improvement levies, because they don't count towards this 20 mil floor. So as a school, you're guaranteed 20 mils and all of these emergencies, bonds, and permanent improvement, etc. And if your school district is an income tax, how many pay a school district income tax? Anybody in Lucas County? We don't. I know cities have them, but you have 200 to 600 schools in the state that have income tax. So income tax doesn't count towards this. And so what's happened is, in 2024, 80% of the levies sought by schools, 80% fall outside of what would count towards the 20 mil floor. 80%. So schools have figured out, we want to get to the floor, right? We want to get to this 20 mils. We want to let the effective rate fall to 20. And then forevermore, as the value of your home goes up, it's completely inflationary. Goes back to pre-1976. And if we pass any emergencies, any bonds, substitutions, etc., that's just gravy on the mashed potatoes, right? That's just extra. And so, we have school districts in my county that have not sought a normal operating levy in 25 years. All they ever seek is an emergency. What does it qualify? Emergency sounds pretty serious, right? If my school district's going for an emergency levy, kids are endangered of not getting an education, right?
Ha.
An emergency
School
means,
bus or
in the state of
sports.
Ohio, an emergency means that at some point in the next 5 years, that school district's treasurer has reason to believe that school might operate in a deficit. That's
Sad-
what an emergency means.
Sad part about it is though, most of us sitting here, to be an A was 95 to 100. Remember back then? Yeah, and anything under 70 was a failing grade. They've lowered the standard for grading, and yet the kids are coming out dumber than dumb can be. You know? They can't even add, subtract, multiply, and divide in the brain.
Can't count money.
No,
Well,
Can't write their signatures.
The
can't read.
quality of our education system is above my pay grade.
yeah, but they keep wanting more money, but what are they doing with the money?
Fair. Well, and I'll get to your question in just one moment. You know, I have a school district, I live in Huron. My school district brings about $10 million of property tax revenue a year. It saw a $2.5 million increase, so 25% increase in its revenue. And the district was pretty healthy financially, so that's the question I asked was, what's this extra $2.5 million going towards?
Right.
Well, we're learning about the impacts of the floor just like the rest of us. That was their answer back to me. And I'm thinking, well, you guys have been purposely trying to get to the floor for 20 years.
Well, at the end of the day, the school districts just need to learn how to work on a budget. Anybody, just like all of us do, I mean, if that is what you get, you gotta make it work.
And their point to me has been, and I've talked to a lot of school district leaders in my county across the state, they say, Caleb, we're playing by the rules set by the legislature. Well, fair. But I also tell my taxpayers in Erie County that if you don't go to the school board meeting, if you don't ask how much additional money did you get and what are you doing with it, if you don't ask those questions, then what right do you have to gripe, right? I mean, that's,
Me too.
but you had a question?
Anthony Wayne voted down their school levy, and there was a post, a Waterville post, somebody said, you dummies, now they're just gonna get your money elsewhere. So if we vote a levy down, is there like a back door that they can get our tax money to make up for that?
Well, it would just depend on where that district was in terms of the floor, right? So if your school district's at the floor, Anthony Wayne is at the floor, and I don't know off the top of my head if it is or not. If it's at the 20 mil floor, that means that if you know, an 11% increase happens, let's say, you're gonna see an 11% increase in the property tax value. And if Anthony Wayne, from the rules the state gives, they should not seek a current operating expense levy. They should seek an emergency, a substitution, one of the other things, a bond, whatever, because a current operating levy is really going to take them off the floor. But think about it this way, right? My school district's at the 20 mil floor. We had a 28% increase in the value of homes in Huron where I live in 2024. The effective rate should have gone down to 16. Right, as the value goes up, the rate comes down, the amount collected by the school stays the same. Well, my rate didn't go down by 4 mils, so I am now paying 4 mils more. I had a 4 mil unvoted increase, that's what that $2.5 million is. And if Anthony Wayne's at the floor, then that's what they're getting.
Maybe that's what they was taught, because
Could
somebody
very
said,
well been.
and that could be, they get hateful when you don't vote
Yes,
for a
ma'am.
school levy.
I'm gonna ask
People
Wayne
threaten you on
as well.
Facebook.
And when the levy failed, they went below the floor.
Okay.
You can't go below the floor, you can be at the
They
floor.
said they were gonna be down at 16 mils, and so the property owners were going to have to make that up.
Yeah, when you go below the floor, it shoots right back up, you exist at the floor.
And that's
So
why
if
the
it,
property tax
yeah.
went up.
Okay. Well, you still, if you
So-
feel like you gotta vote it down, you
so-
vote it down no matter.
So
what.
here's a couple
Cost
of,
ya.
here's a couple of notes here in terms of what the legislature's working on. One thing is, I recommended, let's just eliminate emergency levies. I mean, just go for a standard levy like every other entity does. And the good news is that was included when they eliminated replacements, they also eliminated emergencies. So the school districts, assuming the Senate overrides, fingers crossed, if that were to happen, you'll no longer have to ever see a replacement on your ballot again, you'll no longer see an emergency again. So the other proposal that they did not vote on today, it was one of the 3 the House was slated to vote on, but a very, very common sense one was, let's take these emergencies and substitutions and let's put them into the calculation of the 20 mil floor. Meaning, for my school district, if you've got 5 mils of emergency levies, you're not at the 20 mil floor, you're at 25 mils. meaning you can go down to 23 or 22 or 21 depending on the value, right? So you can't have the gravy on the mashed potatoes. That was part of what they were supposed to be voting on today. They postponed that. So God willing, when they come back in September, they will have the votes to be able to do it. It's a very common sense. I can't imagine. The Democrats voted no on the elimination of the replacements in emergencies, which is really disappointing. And it's shocking that they would not want emergency and substitution levies to be roped into or calculated into the floor. I mean, it's just, because you've got, by the way, you've got districts, Perrysburg's a great example, where they're at the 20 mil floor and they're collecting about 40 mils. So they've got 20 mils of gravy and they've got 20 mils. I mean, that's a, and they keep going to the ballot and losing. I mean, it's just a really outlandish situation where you're one of the higher tax school districts in the state of Ohio and you are getting complete inflationary growth on your first 20 mils. I mean, it's just incredible. So, options to change the system, and I will talk about how the legislature's incorporated some of the things that we're recommending. So I said this to the gentleman earlier, reforming the current system is kind of option number one. Let's try to go back to House Bill 920, great piece of legislation 50 years ago, and let's try to make it work by either reforming significantly or abolishing the 20 mil floor. And we can talk about why they're not abolishing it at this stage. But we talked about reining in the use of levies, including emergency substitution replacement. By the way, this was on the slides when I presented in January. That's exactly what the legislature did. Require higher percentages to pass the levies. That's a bill that David Thomas, who was mentioned earlier, the state rep from Mashville, that's a bill that he has. I think it's very common sense. Overhaul local government school funding to force local entities to be more efficient. You know, right now it's kind of unchecked, you know, entities can get as much money as people vote for. You know, trying to figure out how we fund schools, we're putting all this state money in, we're doing all these tax credits. How can we make the system work more efficiently? And then the budget committee. How many of you have ever heard of a budget commission? Probably none of you. So it's one of the most powerful entities, slept on entities in the state. Every county has a budget commission made up of your auditor, your treasurer, and your prosecutor. And one of the three things today that they were trying to override, they didn't have the votes for, was to empower local budget commissions to act as a check on overtaxing entities. You know, you've got entities in my county that have a 200% carryover balance, meaning they may have an annual budget of $3 million and they've got $6 million in the bank, right? You know, we don't pay taxes to put money in a bank account and let it set forever. And so the budget commission basically, and in my county, it functions this way. Other counties, the prosecutor said, well, the law isn't clear enough to give the budget commission this authority. But the whole idea is to say, you can put a tax on a bill when you demonstrate that it's needed, right? Yeah. And we're not even talking about wasteful spending. You know, we've had entities where we've gone and said, hey, you're getting to a point where, you know, you have too much in the bank, and they'll go build a new building or, you know, have a fire pit and they throw the money in, you know, whatever they do with the money. But the money's gone, right? Poof, it disappears. And that happens. We're not even saying stop the money from going to the fire pit. We're just trying to simply prevent the money from sitting in the bank account. And in my county, we function in that way. Other counties, you don't. But this gives a semblance of a local check to say, if you want to certify a levy that's going to go on the tax bill after it's passed, there still has to be the final check of you have to prove to this group of 3 people that is needed. And I know the folks in this room are probably thinking, you know, my budget commission may not be as aggressive in reining in, right, local entities as mine will. But of 88 counties in the state, 78 to 80 of them are majority Republican. So hypothetically, this would be a good tool for a lot of the state to try to rein in excessive taxation. And again, this passed in the budget, the governor vetoed it. He also vetoed the elimination of replacements emergencies, which was overridden today. He vetoed looping emergencies and substitutions into the floor, which is unbelievable to me. They did not have the votes to override today. And then this budget commission was also in the budget and slated to get overridden today. They did not get to it. Those were the 3.
Is he getting death threats?
Death threats? I hope not.
Well, it sounds like he is.
How many who voted again, you know, who voted against it? I'm
sure it's coming out soon.
Well, on the first vote, which was the, elimination of emergency replacements, they had 61 votes to pass. I think there may have been 1 or 2 Republicans that voted no, all the Democrats. The problem was you had a member who recently had a stroke, you have, people that were on, halfway across the world. I mean, there were some logistical challenges getting members there today, because they normally adjourn July 1st and they vacate, they're out for 2 months. So, that was logistically part of the challenge. The second option is to amend the state's constitution, try to do something more drastic. I mean, I know there's an initiative going around to try to eliminate property taxes. I come from the school of there's, pick your poison, right? There's sales, there's income, there's property. To me, income tax, for me, is the worst, and the reason I say that is because a tax inherently is a disincentive, and we don't want to disincentivize people from buying, earning income, or owning property. But in our society today, the biggest problem we have is people not wanting to work. By far. And so when you have an income tax, you are disincentivizing work. And so to me, the income tax is the biggest problem we face, local and state income tax, and federal for that matter.
Well, but wait a minute, I lived in Texas, no state, no income tax, but your property taxes, woo!
Yeah, that's exactly, you have to pick your poison, right? And so, I believe that we can cap and limit property taxes. And by the way, smaller government is the solution to just a lot, right? I mean, if government just lives within its means.
How about being fiscally responsible?
Exactly what I mean. So part of this is saying, right now you have a system where these local entities tax. And so to cap and limit the poison, right?
But where's our lotto money and that marijuana money going to?
It's such a minuscule so lotto money. Well, the lotto generates $1 billion. We as a state in property taxes last year paid $22 billion, right? So you're talking about apples and oranges of what it takes. And the state, through income and sales, puts another, $15 billion on schools. So schools are a $40 billion enterprise in the state of Ohio. We pay majority of that in property tax, and then you have the cocktail of state school funding and lotto money. And, again, marijuana is even smaller, I think, than lotto money at this stage. So it's just a matter of, if people are on fixed income and they say, we want to limit property taxes, I understand, I respect that position. Just understand, you're gonna get hit somewhere.
Well, I think that people are sending their kids to school should be just, to pay their tuition, like I sent my kids to a Catholic school, I paid for it. Why can't we do that?
In the Ohio Constitution, every child in this state is guaranteed a right to public education. No different than a First Amendment right or Second Amendment right at the national level.
Parents pay.
You have well, constitutionally right now, you can't do that. The Ohio Constitution and the Supreme Court has ruled on this, that you have a right as a child in the state to a free public education. That just is.
So, but then you're picking on the property owners because a lot of them live in apartments.
Yeah, and you're paying that indirectly, arguably, through your, but yeah, you are picking up property owners in the way that you fund. Now, they could fund it with income tax, they could fund it with sales tax, I mean, they don't have to fund the system through property taxes.
Well, then let's do
They
this.
don't.
Well, but the property owner of the apartment building's paying property taxes, and the reason your rent is X dollars is because he's collecting the rent. Or
Yeah.
in your rent, property tax and insurance and this and that.
That's exactly.
But the tenants don't realize that.
And he's not legally allowed to call it that.
They want to clear public, okay?
So to just wrap up here, the amended constitution, you can set a cap.
Come on. I
You
mean,
can put the General Assembly in charge of levying a uniform tax rate rather, just like they set a statewide sales tax and income tax rate, you could say you're gonna set a statewide property tax rate. Obviously, the General Assembly is a little more conservative than, Lucas County, whatever entity you wanna say. And then finally, I think a couple things Erie County did, which is really notable, and I think the state should look at, and they actually are looking at, is we created Doge in Erie County. In December, our county commissioners went and said, and they called it a Blue Ribbon Commission, they made it somewhat bipartisan, but they said, we are gonna study how local government works. In a county of 75,000 people, we last year raised approximately $730 million of local revenue, an unbelievable amount of money, between our townships and our schools and our cities and our villages, and all of the above in our county. And the idea was, let's find the 10 or 15 areas, fire, police, roads, schools, all the above, and let's figure out what duplication, what waste, what obvious things can we eliminate. They did 6 months. There was a group of 7 people, largely retired government, private sector officials, went through and did this process. And, they produced a report, and now it's our job politically to go out and find people for school board, find people for council, find people at the county level who are gonna support the principles in that report. Not that you're gonna agree with every page or every suggestion, but that you're gonna say, hey, we can live the way we've always lived in government. I've been in government, and there's a lot of complacency. It's not, we envision a lot of times in government, it's a bunch of evil people conspiring against society. That's not been my experience. I think it's just people that are used to doing the same thing every day, and it's I call it the gravity of government sucks us into complacency and growth, and it just spirals. And that's what we're seeing as a state, why we're in this crisis, why people are really revolting and rising up on the property tax issues, because people can't afford it anymore. And so, we went to our schools and we said, hey, you may not like us, but I guarantee you won't like what the legislature does to you more than what we're gonna talk about. So, those are the conversations we had in our county. Our commissioners were the only county in the state where we suspended all of the county's portion of real estate tax, $8 million tax cut that we gave back to the residents this year. So people saw their values jump, and the districts at the 20 mil floor, the schools collected a lot more money, but the county share of property taxes, the county didn't take a nickel of property taxes this year. The county government itself, so schools and everybody else got their money, but the county didn't take it. So we're proud of that relief, that we were the only county in the state to do it this year. And so we'll continue to be advocates.
Maybe they should send out a profit and loss statement.
What's that?
Maybe you should send out a government profit and loss statement. Cause if I don't make mine, I think.
Right. Do you have a
I
question?
wanted to know,
Yeah,
what kind of thing is it
report.
like, they had a meeting last summer, early fall, about, taxing property owners to clean up the waterways, And they said, so many people were against it, that they said, we're tabling it for now, we'll bring it up next year. Well, our property taxes all went up, they do it according to the property taxes. And then, they weren't going to go to all the park systems and stuff, because, we'll go to you guys first, that's exactly what they said. And then they said, well, now the park system says they'll give 17,000 of their money, which they just had a levy on, to up the park system and that, to clean up their area.
Well, wasn't it though,
But
That comes out of our money.
we had a meeting last week at 2:00 downtown in the government center on the same thing. They had it out in the different areas before, and so many people came in. 2:00 in the afternoon, if you're working, you're not going to go there. There's no parking at 2:00, and it's double the amount, and they still had it. Now, they had it, the 22nd is the second one, if they feel like doing it, but it's the county. And certain people have opted out. It started in White House because they were flooding and stuff. But now White House is going to take care of their people. Toledo is going to take care of their people. So they won't have to have the property taxes. And, I think even Fulton now has come in and said they will take care of others. But all in this area, no, they're not going to.
Talk about the Springfield area.
Yeah, we have to go see each of our own county people and go down there and talk to them and tell them, hey.
And it doesn't matter, once they have a meeting and that they know that what they're doing. So, our property taxes are going to go up there for 6 years, but then it can, and if they don't get to your property to help with the ditch, even though you might not even see a ditch or anything,
wait a minute,
they might get it in the continuing
Are you talking about as
years.
an assessment on the property?
Yes.
A ditch assessment, yeah.
I was very active in that, and if I understand correctly, back a year and a half ago or whatever, when this all was coming out, it was just the farmers and the people who had land to the ditches that were being, yes, it was. And it was like, because of all the water runoff from all the other areas,
No.
it needed to be a county
Was anybody
issue.
in this, like, in the area?
Well, I live near 10 Mile Creek and all of that, and that's what it was out there.
And you're
I'm
gonna
not
charge
stupid.
20% after 6 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot
And,
incorrect.
and when they clean out somebody's ditches and whatever, besides making them bigger and taking stuff.
Farmers that will be getting hit the hardest.
You have to clean up anything they get out of.
Oh, no, they did put that in the provision. They said that they were gonna make sure that they took their debris with them.
No?
Yeah, they wrote it, I said it at the end, she said, we want that debris to be taken care of by you. They put that in the highlights when they voted.
They didn't take care.
They're gonna supposed to take care of the debris.
Oh, they didn't get that in writing, though.
No,
Right.
they said that in the meeting at the end.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, President Trump, he's doing away with the Department of Education, sending the money back to schools.
Right.
Then he wants to do away with property tax. Is that the plan? Like, the money comes, all that money that is going to corruption and the government and the Department of Education is going back to the schools?
I would love to say yes. I mean, the reality is federal spending on education represents a very small portion of what funds your average school district in Ohio or anywhere else across the country. You know, it's probably 40% for the average, and this varies, but 40% local property tax, 40% state, 20% grants and federal. So eliminating waste sure will help, you know, at the federal level, and cutting the middleman out, getting that money, every bit helps. But when it comes to the issue of education specifically, it is a state and local problem, primarily. Yes, sir.
I was always under the understanding that the school levies will always go up because teachers will be retiring and that money, they'll be hiring more pensions, so they're always gonna need more money for that
Well, the
reason,
state,
right?
the state teacher retirement system, the pension system is at the state level.
Oh, is it?
That's a Columbus-
Okay,
yeah,
so
that's
it's
a
really
Columbus
not so
problem.
much local. Okay, I'm misunderstood, thank you.
Okay, what else?
You did a
You
fine
all-
job.
Yes, thank you.
Very educated.